Good evening, and welcome to episode 80 of the Political Mike podcast. With Election Day exactly 2 weeks away, amidst all the political noise, most Americans seem to have one topic at the forefront of their minds: the economy, specifically inflation. A survey from the Pew Research Center found that the economy is the top issue for U.S. voters as the country approaches the midterm elections. The survey found that the American public has a dim view of current economic conditions, with only 17% of U.S. adults saying the economy is in excellent or good shape. This number was slightly up from July, when just 13% of Americans view the economic conditions as favorable. A whopping 79% of Americans say that the economy is very important when it comes to the voting decision. However, it is more likely than those who say the economy is important will favor a Republican candidate. Well, when we look at the polls, we see that ABC polls showed that Americans trust that Republicans would do a better job on a key set of issues with across-the-board double-digit edges on inflation, the economy, gas prices, and including crime, according to a recent ABC News Ipsos poll that was released. Inflation sees one of the larger goals, with 36% of Americans trusting the GOP and 21% trusting Democrats. Similar gaps exist around gas prices, with 36% of Americans trusting Republicans and 22% trusting Democrats. And broadly considering the state of the economy, 36% of Americans trust Republicans to do a better job, according to the ABC News poll, while 24% trust Democrats. The economy is a complicated issue, and to help break it all down, a very distinguished gentleman. We have Mr. Richard Friesen. It's a privilege and honor to have you here, Mr. Friesen. I'm going to go ahead and introduce you. Mr. Friesen, Mr. Friesen is the creator and developer of the innovative and exclusive Mind Muscles training process that turns the psychology of trading on its head. He works with financial professionals, independent traders, business leaders, and entrepreneurs who want to expand their mental game to make more consistent profits. With in-depth experience as a broker, floor trader, financial software developer, and an entrepreneur, he brings concrete real-world experiences to his clients. During the years dedicated to building Mind Muscles, Mr. Friesen was an independent consultant to the financial industry, specializing in intellectual property development and management. He holds a BA in philosophy, a master's degree in clinical psychology, and he is a graduate of the Gesalt Institute in San Francisco, along with he has a master's certification in neuro-linguistic programming. His background in psychology has been instrumental in his development of Mind Muscles. Mr. Friesen, it's a privilege to have you on the program.
Oh, I'm so delighted to be here. And I'm really looking forward to a very creative conversation, one which we take all these complexities of economics and just make them really simple and tie them in a bow by the time we're ending.
I just want to put a plug in for your book, A Private Conversation with Money, by Richard Friesen. You can be ordered from Amazon. We also are going to be joined with someone who's a friend of the Political Mike, a regular, Mr. Egwo Nwankpa, who is currently a vice president in one of the largest financial services institutions in the world. He is part of the Supplier Diversity and Responsible Sourcing team, where he serves as a supplier diversity manager, specifically for the local markets and partnerships. In his position, Mr. Nwankpa serves as an advocate for small and diverse businesses, a liaison to key partner organizations, a project manager for strategic initiatives, and a manager and analyst of related supplier diversity spend data. Mr. Nwankpa, thanks for being back on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And last but certainly not least, a favorite professor of mine, Professor W. Sherman Rogers from Howard University School of Law. Professor Rogers is an attorney and a tenured professor of law at Howard University. He's also a registered stockbroker, general securities principal, and has life and health insurance licenses. During his career, Professor Rogers has taught at 6 law schools: Miles College Law School, Thurgood Marshall School of Law at Texas Southern University, Howard University School of Law, Brigham Young University School of Law, the UDC David A. Clark School of Law, and the University of Baltimore School of Law. He has taught a number of courses during his career in legal education, which include corporations, securities, regulation, agency, partnerships, and other unincorporated business organizations, property, federal courts, conflict of laws, entrepreneurship, law and policy remedies, Title VII litigation, civil procedure, and law and economics and capitalism. One of my favorite courses I took my 3L year. Professor, thanks for being back on.
Good to be here.
So I want to start, gentlemen, with the discussion. the Biden administration has actually has had a lot of legislative victories, regardless of whether you fall on the political aisle. A lot of their agenda legislatively has been achieved, and this year the biggest achievement was the Inflation Reduction Act. The White House has repeatedly argued that this bill would actually reduce inflation. Republicans have criticized that this would actually exacerbate the current state of the economy. I want to ask your opinion. Is the Biden administration's argument that the Inflation Reduction Act would actually pay for itself and would actually be beneficial in the long run when we're looking at the economic state that we're in with inflation, the price of gas going up, the price of goods at the store going up? Is there some validity to that argument, or are Republicans right, and that this bill would actually cause more damage, more harm to the current state of inflation?
Go ahead.
Well, if no one else will talk at the moment, I guess I'll jump on in here. So the American Rescue Act, Congress passed that in March of 2021. And of course, as you may recall, $1,400 worth of stimulus checks, an additional $300 in unemployment benefits, and expanded child tax credit, aid to state and local governments, and other cash payments. Now, how have the politics of the American Rescue Act been used against Biden? Well, some experts, even some in Biden's own party, like Larry Summers, warned that the new spending would cause the economy to overheat. At the time, the Labor Department had put the annual inflation rate at a tame 1.7%, but that was back then. Today, annual inflation stands at 8.3%. Of course, that's being used against Biden in a mighty way. Summers believes that the country could have protected the economy and generated far less inflation. Summers believes that $600 billion to $750 billion would have been a worthy alternative to Biden's $2 trillion proposal. And so Summers has been a kind of a squeaky wheel who hasn't been particularly helpful, but he hasn't necessarily tried to crush Biden. But others, such as Goldman Sachs, believe that the economy could absorb more federal spending at the time than Summers did, or the Congressional Budget Office. 18 months later, there's a consensus that the rescue plan was a double-edged sword, bathing the economy in cash that spurred the fastest recovery of any group of 7 nation, which is a good thing. Even as indiscriminate as the nature of that spending may have been, it helped to ignite the biggest jump in consumer prices over 40 years, and that's being used against Biden. The highest estimate is that the American Rescue Plan costs 4 percentage points, that is half of the 8% of inflation. That was from a Johns Hopkins University economist. However, at the time, the San Francisco Fed, in an October 2021 analysis, said that the American Rescue Plan was responsible for just 0.3% of added inflation. Well, the San Francisco Fed's more recent studies, led by Oscar Jorda, said that the American Rescue Plan was responsible for about 3 percentage points of the increased inflation. Now, that's being used against Biden. I don't know whether you want to hear the pro-Biden, and then I'll just shut up. Since I can answer your question, let me just give you the pro-Biden. The American Rescue Plan legislation's benefits outweighed its costs, according to Gene Sperling. Well, you know, Gene Sperling is going to say that because he's the White House's coordinator for the American Rescue Plan. Many felt that the Obama administration did not spend enough, which caused the recovery from the Great Recession of 2008 to be very, very tepid. That's why it took more than 6 years for the United States to recover the jobs lost during the Great Recession. And the Biden administration said, we're not gonna make that same mistake. We're gonna go big. We're gonna go big. So the situation at the time of the legislation and leading up to the legislation was as follows. In December 2020, which was the last calendar year of Trump's presidency, the economy had lost 140,000 jobs. Without government funding, the jobless rate would be more than weak than indeed the pre-pandemic forecast for 2024, leaving millions without work. More than 3,300 Americans were dying each day as the Omicron variant spread across the country, leaving the nation unsettled about the days ahead. However, in the 18th month since the American Rescue Plan, and this is what Biden is trying to trumpet, more than 8 million Americans who are jobless are now working. And in 2021, the economy posted the fastest growth since 1984 and ended the 3-year percent larger than before the pandemic. Americans received the stimulus payments of more than $242 billion in the first 6 days after Biden signed the rescue plan into law, which created a tremendous infusion of cash. Now, these are some things that I think in if you look at it holistically, these were some good things. Now, here's some problems. The first burst in spending was on new and used cars, but consumers encountered a market that was millions of cars short in supply. And as Dr. Friesen and as Wu could tell you, when you have a decrease in supply of a good, it has an inverse effect on the price. So a decrease in supply will typically cause the price of a good to increase. And we saw that with used cars going through the ceiling. In many corners of the economy, employment rose alongside prices. That's a good thing. Employment rising, people being hired. So here are some things I think that you cannot blame Biden on. And then I'm done, Political Mike. I'll be done, Political Mike. Mark Zandi of Moody Analytics said that the American Rescue Plan provided some good inflation after years in which the Fed struggled to get the economy moving fast enough to reach its 2% target for price stabilization. But here are some of the causes of the bad inflation, many of which Biden had nothing to do with. Unexpected hits from the Delta Omicron outbreak, the Chinese lockdown of its economy, an unthinkable war in Ukraine. I mean, that's just supply chain shortages. When there are shortages of goods but high demand for them, the price of goods will go up. Here's an interesting stat, Political Mike. The average automaker has 250 tier 1 suppliers and 18,000 total suppliers, according to global management consulting firm McKinsey. Can you imagine that? 18,000 total suppliers? Tier 1 firms supply components directly to a company. Tier 2 suppliers supply to tier 1 suppliers and so forth. And most companies don't even know who their suppliers are beyond their second tier suppliers. So this is a crazy situation. You can't really blame Biden for supply chain backups. You can't really blame him for the war on Ukraine, for the Chinese lockdown, or for the Delta Omicron outbreak that took place. So in conclusion, there's other things I could say, but the Federal Reserve, for our listeners, is the agency, which is not an agency of the U.S., by the way, that is tasked with keeping inflation under control. And they do this through the Fed's Federal Open Markets Committee. They meet about once every 6 weeks, and then they determine monetary policy. And every 6 weeks, they have been raising the interest rate for the federal funds rate, which is a fancy term that only means the rate that banks charge each other in the money market to gain access to their money so that they can meet their 10% reserve requirement. Now, that's a mouthful, and that probably is not particularly helpful. But the bottom line is this. The Fed every 6 weeks has been raising its benchmark federal funds rate, which trickles to every other interest rate. If you look at what's happening in the mortgage industry, mortgage rates are about 7%. And it's doing, I guess, what the Fed wants, because it's slowing down consumer spending. And so this is a weird situation that we're in. At one point, we're trying to keep out of a recession, but at the same time, the Fed is trying to get you consumers to stop spending so much. What does it mean to not spend so much? I don't know. It's like walking on a tightrope, okay? But consumers' spending makes up 70% or more of our gross domestic income. And so, that's what the Fed is attempting to do.
Professor.
But this is it. And then I don't have anything else to say. Look what happened over in Great Britain. You saw what happened to the most recent prime minister, correct? She's trying to do two things at once. She's trying to rev up the British economy by cutting taxes. I didn't understand that. While the British Central Bank was raising interest rates to bring prices down. You go figure. I guess that's why she lost her job.
Well, I'm gonna say a few words. First of all, the gentleman that I have the opportunity to be on this panel with, I have no business speaking with them. So I'm glad I was, I could put this on my bucket list. That Brother Rogers has me speaking next to him, and Mr. Friesen, I'm a little less familiar, but I still know your work precedes you. So this is definitely an occasion that I'm in the same place as you are. But I'll say this, as someone who just returned from London, I happened to be there when the Prime Minister resigned. I think what we are dealing with an economy of feels. Okay, what does the economy feel like? Not what the economy is, right? So I think if you look by the book, people would say, look at unemployment, it's pretty good. This is as good as it gets, really. 3.5, 3.6. You're not going to do better than that, right? If you look at the strength of the dollar, right? I was in the UK for a week. I've never been able to get an exchange that close to the pound. It was basically dollar for dollar. That's never happened in my life. It's never happened whenever I'm in Europe. And that feels good. I think the problem you have, employers are bracing for what they think is a recession, right? You have interest rates rising, so people think something's coming. It feels like the other shoe is going to drop. So I think that's why you're getting the reactions that you're getting. I think it's more, again, it's an economy of feels, not really a economy of the realities.
And yeah, I think, go ahead, Mike.
Oh, really quick before I jump to you, Mr. Friesen. To Professor Rogers' point, I was looking at a 1984, because you had mentioned in your layout of all of the statistics to compare this current economic inflation, previous inflations that the United States had experienced, specifically during the early days of the Reagan administration. The 1984 election was underway, and I was looking at an old campaign commercial that the Reagan team put out. And it was very interesting. They said on one side, we've got Reaganomics. On the other side, we've got Mondalenomics. Reaganomics calls for cutting taxes. Mondalenomics calls for raising your taxes. Reaganomics calls for cutting spending. Mondalenomics calls for raising taxes. And of course, Mondalenomics is named after his opponent in that election, Walter Mondale, the former vice president. Reaganomics calls for creating jobs through incentives. Mondalenomics, raise taxes. Reaganomics, Mondalenomics, raise taxes. And you know what's interesting? The ad ended by saying, look at how far we've gone between the Carter administration, Reagan administration. Bacon, the price of bacon used to be 30% higher. The price of milk, 30% higher. Could you imagine? And the commercial ad ended by adding, could you imagine spending $2.75 for gas? I couldn't think about the irony. If only we could be spending $2.75 today on a regular, right? But Mr. Friesen, take it away.
Oh, well, I certainly appreciate the details and the facts, because those are really important. What is causing inflation and what's the depth? And one of the questions you ask is the Inflation Reduction Act, does it reduce inflation? Well, I had the temerity to print the whole thing out, all several hundred pages. And in preparation, I'm probably one of 3 people in the United States who's actually read it.
One of 2, maybe.
One of 2, maybe. I'm sure President Biden didn't. And I got out my yellow highlighter to highlight what would cause a reduction in our rate of inflation. And what I saw was incentives. I saw a lot of government cost increases. I saw transfer payments. I saw some things would be cheaper for some people. But in terms of, if we look at inflation as our ability to be more productive, deliver more value, create hope for the future, so people actually invest their time, their energy, encourage their children. If we look at education, skill development, to create a world that we're more productive in, and we look at our money supply and see, is it matching our rate of growth? So those are the things I look for. Ooh, I couldn't see anything. So maybe both of you or any of you could point out something I missed. I mean, it took a long time to read it, but let me just open it at random here. That's qualified commercial clean vehicles in general, subpart D of part 4 of subchapter A of chapter 1, as amended by the preceding provisions of this act, is amended by the following at the end of the following new section 45. And it goes on like that. Almost everything refers to some subsection or some other part. And so needless to say, chasing those all down would require a whole team of people. So as a result, I'm going to say I've read it. I have no idea what most of it means, but I did not see anything clearly that increased, what you said, about hope and what we believe, I think is so important. But I didn't see anything in there that created more cultural awareness or improvements or the kind of hope for the future. What I saw was a lot of additional costs, transfer payments, and additional government taxation.
So I would only disagree, and I haven't read the whole thing. So I would say that the one part of all of the Inflation Reduction Act that's helpful. Number one, we have, and Brother Rogers said something that was very important. We have a serious supply problem, right? In coming from being the supply chain guy on the live, I think if you look at the fact that some of those things are meant to create additional supply, it's meant to take some of our foreign dependence on certain things that have caused sort of this, because really we're looking at a worldwide issue, right?
We're looking at a global issue on supply chain breakup. Yes,
the supply chain breakup dependence, right? So you look at the war in Ukraine, you say, what does that have to do with the UK? Well, it has everything to do with the UK, because the UK makes very little of what they consume, right, as an economy. So since they're, when your fuel prices and all the things that were coming from Eastern Europe are now delayed, are now much more expensive, are now getting disrupted by bombings and things like that, or embargoes against Russia, right? So that has lessened the supply of fuel, right? America, while we tend to be a little bit more energy independent than the UK, we still have to create other ways that our supply can be less inhibited by what's going on in the world. I think so. All the move towards electric vehicles in there. If you look at even some of the manufacturing incentives and things like that, are all meant to try to make our economy a little bit more foolproof towards the supply disruptions that come with globalization. And it's funny that you should mention Ronald Reagan in those years. That's where, really the globalization was created around that time, where people found that, it's cheaper to make sneakers in Taiwan than in California. So let's make our sneakers in Taiwan for $2 and then sell them for $200 in the United States, right? And you just put Air Jordan on them and people will buy them. The problem is, when there becomes a supply chain disruption, your consumers still want the goods. Now you have to have armed escorts. You have to have aircraft carriers in the sea to make sure that those goods get to the place. And and I think that's what really what the Biden Act is supposed to do, is make us more independent of some of the supply chain disruptions.
I think that's so wise, because I was born in 1947, and I'm starting to wonder if I haven't lived in a golden age, and that as the global order breaks down, supply chains break down, we have to bring it to the US. And I think that eventually robotics is going to solve some of that, but it's going to cost a lot more. And even bringing it back, I think, is going to be inflationary. And that's not any politician's fault. But I think that as the order breaks down and we bring things home, we're all going to be paying more for almost everything.
So the Inflation Reduction Act includes three major tax reforms. It institutes a corporate minimum tax on the book income of highly profitable corporations, adding a 1% tax on corporations when they buy back their own stock, and investing $80 billion in the IRS over the next 10 years to increase tax enforcement. And these reforms, it's argued that Senate Democrats argue that these reforms will fight inflation, make the tax system fairer, generate revenue, and reduce the budget deficit without raising taxes on middle or lower income working families. Gentlemen, in your view, what is your take on that assertion, and also on the argument that the programs within the Inflation Reduction Act pay for themselves in the long run? You're talking about programs that are designed to fight climate change. I think this was the first major piece of legislation that the United States has put forward that actually address specifically efforts to combat climate change, and to not just reduce carbon emissions, but to set goals, future goals for the United States to meet, to be competitive with other nations like Germany, whose election was all centered on that one issue in the environment. What is your take on the argument that the Inflation Reduction Act pays for itself in the long run, and that the taxes imposed on top corporations actually prove to be beneficial to the economy?
So I think, and the gentleman here will, I'm sure they might have a thing or two to say about that. If you told me 20 years ago that companies issuing ESG reports would be almost as important as their financial statements that they submit every year, I would have thought that there was no way, right? Even though, as a CPA, I've put together a lot of financial statements in my life. And when you look at what a financial statement is, often it's close to a marketing tool, right? You've never seen a CFO or a CEO in the financial statement say, you know what, the downturn in finances in my company is my fault, right? It's typically there was snow, even if it was an ice cream parlor in California. It's the hailstorm that happened in September that ruined quarter three's profits. There's always something, right? So, and the reason why I say that is ESG has taken a life of its own to the point where companies better report on it. They better show what they're doing, or else it's going to affect them on Wall Street, right? That's a huge difference. So when you look at the emphasis on the environment in business realizes that climate change and these things are severely impacting the seasons. There's flooding in places that shouldn't be. Rivers are running dry. Species are dying. Again, the supply chain is being affected because goods are harder to come by because of the seasonal changes. So I think when it comes down to a dollars and cents thing, you creating some legislation that makes people smarter about the way they treat the environment, in a sense, is going to pay for itself. Because listen, when we have 15 tornadoes in April, right? It's the government, it's FEMA, it's all the taxpayer that's going to pay for it. When these supply chains are disrupted because it's now snowing in LA and it's never snowed in LA, or there's tornadoes in LA, these things are all a disruption on business. So there's an incentive, and it's going to be more legislative action, whether the Republicans are in office or the Democrats, believe it or not, because everyone is unable now to deny the effects of either climate or the environment. The Republicans might say the environment, the Democrats would say that is climate change, whatever it is. Everyone knows that there's somewhat of a difference, and it needs to be solved for.
Professor Rogers? Oh, you're still muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah, everything that Mr. Mwampa said about environmental, social, and governance requirements coming out of hedge funds and institutional investors that are increasingly vocal about changes that need to happen at some of our leading corporations, including big asset managers like BlackRock, are really on point. That's the reason why it still puzzles me somewhat when you have a group of politicians who are still somewhat denying the reality of climate change. There's still some of that going on there. And then you have politicians, I don't need to name any in particular, who are now taking on your Larry Finks and others who have championed ESG as being very, very important for corporations' bottom line if they want to be around 10, 15 years from now, and the need to make changes now. So I have a question as to at what point will some of these politicians who are now going head to head with those who, especially institutional investors who are championing ESG, environmental, social, and governance matters, at what point will the politicians at least generally recognize that we've got some problems? Of course, we know that they are interfering with social policies that they don't like, but to deny for the sake of ExxonMobil maybe making a few extra bucks the reality of what these carbon emissions are doing to our country for the sake of propping up businesses. Well, you can call it clean coal, you can call it whatever you want to, but these are technologies that are fading into the background because most people can see the handwriting on the wall. So I believe that ultimately the goal of coming up with our own production of chips and increasing electric vehicles and the like are to our benefit in the long run and will save us money. But look what happened to persons who, at least one person, who is being considered for the Federal Reserve. The mere fact that this person said that hey, look, I think that environmental issues are important in making monetary policy. I think we should take that in consideration. Well, that person, to the best of my recollection, that nomination didn't get through. So we still have some resistance, and I think it's in keeping with our libertarian small government beginnings, which did not show any signs of change until the 1930s. I mean, we were one of the last major nations to have a central bank, for Pete's sake, because of our fear of any kind of central authority. And so it took until 1913 to get the Federal Reserve. Wow. So I think
and
that's
since
where we are
1913, the U.S. dollar has dropped down to like 2 cents in value.
Interesting point. And it took runs on banks and lots of other things. But in any case, I think Egwu is right on point. I do think that we do have to start making some of these changes. I do think the Inflation Reduction Act certainly is an attempt to take us into the 21st century in earnest. But we still have some of these hangover politicians who seem to be willing to stop using, for example, BlackRock because of Larry Fink's and other money managers, hedge funds, institutional investors using their clout as shareholders to say, well, we think that you should take some of these environmental, social, and governance matters into account because they do make a difference as to your bottom line. And if you don't believe so, you're going to find out the hard way. And I think that's the message that I'm getting from Egwu.
So the White House has put out a statement arguing that the Inflation Reduction Act makes urgent investments to lower prescription drug costs, healthcare costs, energy costs. We talked about climate a little bit, and to create opportunities for America's 33 million small businesses and innovative startups. It is the most aggressive action, it says, the White House is arguing, that we have taken to confront the climate crisis. We've talked about climate. When you look at a lot of, we're in the season of Senate debates, gubernatorial debates, congressional debates, and a lot of the Republicans, particularly, I'm thinking of the gubernatorial debate that took place last week between Governor Ron DeSantis and the Democratic nominee, Charlie Crist, the former governor of Florida, who's now running to get his position back. There was a point in the debate where they were talking about small businesses, and Charlie Crist had pointed at his opponent, Governor DeSantis, and said, you have been anti-business because you have criticized and made villains of Disney and other companies that have encouraged their employees, encouraged those who are patrons of their business to take precautions for the COVID-19 pandemic. DeSantis argues, well, if I'm anti-business, then why did X amount of businesses come into the state of Florida since my tenure began? So business seems to be something that's in the forefront of a lot of people's minds, those who have small businesses, those who benefit from small businesses in some way or another. And so in your position, in your view, we talked about the polling. We talked about the arguments both parties are making in the waning days of this campaign season. What do you think about how the policies? We talked about the CHIPS Act briefly. Professor Rogers mentioned the CHIPS Act. How the policies have helped or hurt small businesses within these past 2 years as we're coming out of the recession caused by COVID-19. Larry Summers, like Professor Rogers mentioned, forecasted dark economic times coming in the aftermath of COVID. How do you think small businesses fare up against the Democratic policies these past 2 years?
Wow. Well, you said a lot there, Mike. So let's go back to Ron DeSantis, because he's one of my favorite politicians ever created. Because in that conversation and that debate, there was a moment where Charlie Crist asked, can you say that you're going to stay for your whole term, right? That basically say right now, are you going to run for president? And he froze, right? And I think that's a moment, because that is the reason for everything he's done thus far, right? Because he is running for president and he wants to have a track record of an ultra-conservative, successful governor to run on, right? And in some ways, the COVID crisis was his reaffirming party. I think it's not his coming out party, but he was able to put people dying in the backdrop, and still say, you know what, this mass stuff doesn't make any sense. We don't need it. He still took all the COVID money. He still took all the vaccines. He still did all the other stuff. But in front of the cameras, he learned from the Trump school that you can be this way in front of camera and then you can't, right? So with all that aside, I think government have done that. How has small business fared? It's a good question. Depends on what your business is. Anybody who's gone through an American city over the last 2 years has seen restaurants they go to have shuttered. They've seen businesses that they used to frequent go down, and they've also seen new ones come up. They've also seen some people who fared very well. I know people who have a cleaning company, right? Started off very small. They just happened to start a cleaning company in 2019. They're making 10 times what they were making before, because there's a new emphasis on cleanliness and things like that, right? There's some people who had small internet things where they're doing live streaming and stuff like that, are making hand over fist. So I think money doesn't ever go away, but it shifts who has it, right? So if you were an in-person speaker and you couldn't do things virtually, you lost money. But there's someone who could do it virtually and they got money. I think that's more of the shift that you see in businesses. Now, when there was stimulus going out there, I think businesses were doing even better, right? Because people had more cash. All of a sudden, I can take my children to McDonald's 3 times a week instead of just on Friday, right? We might just get French fries, but I can take them out. I can do things. I can do things that I didn't do before. Maybe I always wanted to take Kung Fu lessons. Now I can afford them because I was getting a stimulus check and I was feeling good about myself and I had extra. So I don't think that most people were pocketing that money. I think that money was going into the economy as a true stimulus. So I think things were appearing better than they were. And you might make an argument for the Andrew Yang theory of life that maybe we need to have some sort of government stimulus at all times. I don't know.
Well, I think that one thing I've seen is the innovation, the creativity, the resilience of a lot of American people through the pandemic. My gosh, what a change in our lifestyle, our culture, our belief systems. It's further exacerbated the political divide around the issue. Mm-hmm. And in spite of that, businesses closed, people survived, people got new businesses, got new jobs, people shifted. Oh my gosh. I just think we can really celebrate the American spirit through all this, even with our political differences. I think that we've done really well, and I think we can appreciate all the individuals who each contributed to our collective well-being. And we're on the other side, hopefully, of the pandemic, and we're coming out of it. And so I'm really appreciative.
So one issue that's gotten a lot of attention and continues to garner attention as we're getting closer to these midterm elections is student loan forgiveness. The White House, of course, has put out a plan. There's applications open currently right now where folks can sign up to see if they qualify for forgiveness. Those who have student loans can get up to $10,000 if they did not get a Pell Grant. And those who did get a Pell Grant can get up to $20,000 in federal student loan money forgiven. Now, the Republican Party has put out a statement, a sheet in which they argue that, that this move is only a pandering to young people and to Democrats as we're getting closer to election season. So they're really arguing that this is a politically motivated giveaway to the wealthy, it argues. They said for over 19 months and counting, President Biden has used a permanent pandemic narrative to unilaterally maintain a moratorium on student loan repayments. Now, President Biden is canceling up to $20,000 in student loan debt for wealthy borrowers. They said that the cost to taxpayers would amount to $330 billion. They said that over 60% of Americans do not have a college degree. 70% of the benefit will go to those in the top half of the income spectrum. And among households making $120,000 per year, 59% have federal student loan debt. They go on to argue that 87% of adults without student loans are being forced to pay for the 13% who chose to take on student loans. Among those vocal on the Republican side, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Ted Cruz, and Biden, of course, went after them about 4 days ago. And even before Biden went out after them and he was speaking at the Democratic convention, the White House put out a tweet and laid out exactly how much in PPP loans each of those Republicans that had something to say had forgiven. The White House argued that they posted a tweet in which they argued that Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene had $183,504 in PPP loans forgiven. They also pointed out that Matt Gaetz, Mike Kelly, Markway Mullen, Kevin Hern, Representatives Vern Buchanan, they've all had their fair share of PPP loans forgiven. And they laid out the exact number and price tag. And so I want to ask you about the White House's move. Do you believe that the Biden administration is correct in taking on such an endeavor in the midst of this inflation? Or do you believe that the Republicans, the conservatives, are on the right track in arguing that this would actually do more damage to the economy than good?
I have the most unusual argument for student debt forgiveness. The federal student loans were first offered in 1958 under the National Defense Act. And what happened was colleges and universities took the money. The students got a good education. It really helped out. And then the colleges and universities says, let's raise our rates. The government and the Pell Grants and all the different organizations gave the students more money. They raised their rates. They gave them more money. They raised their rates. College costs have gone up like 1,200% since the start of this. College administrators have gone from like 5 times per student has gone up, 5 times per student. So we have just a tremendous increase in overhead. Now here's the joke. The government gives money to the universities, only it gives it through the backs of the students. The colleges raise the rates, the students have more of a burden, and it's a con job. The universities produce students who prefer generally more government control and more government involvement in the economy. And that helps the government. They say, whoopee, we're getting more left-leaning voters, so we're going to give them more money to give to more universities, and the universities charge more money. So my argument for student debt relief is that it's been a big con job off the backs of the students. And this has been a horrible experience for many of them. So although that was some of it was tongue in cheek. But nevertheless, that's an argument. Now, in terms of the moral hazard, in terms of people who paid off their debt, in terms of the middle class, that's going to end up paying some of the taxes. You can make that argument, but I think it started as a con job.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on student loans. First of all, it's a marketing thing all over again, right? So, first of all, let me give kudos to the Biden administration social media team for putting out those PPP loans right on time as the complaints come out. I thought that was, as somebody who's a part owner of a social media business and a digital media business, I thought that was incredible because that was something that the Republicans would do. And the Democrats finally took a page out of that book and did it. Student loans, the fallacy in student loans is the fact that I don't think the average American person realizes how much debt people actually have in student loans. And I don't think people understand the fact that the way effective interest actually works. And I say that because if you have got to the point that you only own $10,000 left, you've probably already paid 3 times that in just interest alone, right?
Mm-hmm.
The government's already made money off of you for doing very little, right? All the government did is say, you want to go to school? We're going to have an administrator that's going to charge you for this 2 years after you graduate. And we're going to be charging you interest after a certain date. And we're going to be taking if you miss those payments, you can't discharge it with bankruptcy. There's no way out of it, right? So when you think about how much the government has made off of students, that argument is never being made to the others, where they're like, people keep saying, I shouldn't have to pay for you to go to college and have a better job than me, and not realizing the fact that I've already repaid several times over the amount that I borrowed. And then when you look at inflation, it's really even a worse deal. And I think as a society, I think we do value people who are educated. I think we do, at times, people are more educated, get better jobs, but that's not always the case either. It's not always the case that you come out and you make $400,000 a year, right? So calling people wealthy because they make over $100,000 is, again, trying to reason with the lowest common denominator. We're all people in the U.S. Somewhere in the United States, $120,000 a year is a lot of money. Not in any of the major cities in the U.S., especially in the North or in the West, but down maybe in the middle of Kansas, if you get $120 a year, that's big dollars. But here, you're barely making it, right? I live in New York. In fact, here at $120,000, you are poor. You are eligible for student aid for your children going to private school at $120,000 a year. So when we play to that denominator in Congress, when people start saying, what, it's not fair that we're paying for it, but I got a PPP loan, it's all, again, marketing. It comes down to the marketing of what they're trying to do. I wouldn't want Biden to give tens of millions of people something to feel good about a few weeks before the election. I'm going to make it feel as worse as it can be. Some of those people in Congress, let me put it this way. Some of those very congressional people is going to come out next year that they applied for forgiveness to. People on their staff applied for forgiveness and got it. You know why? Because it's the right thing to do. But they're going to market it as though it's the worst thing ever. They're going to market it like it's the mark of the beast in Christian churches. They're going to market it like it's the worst thing that could ever happen. And some people are going to buy it, and dig their heels in, and some people are going to be happy and vote accordingly.
I would add that there are legal challenges to the president's authority to forgive these loans in as modest a way as he did. Political Mike, I'm not sure whether you're asking us to make a point blank assessment as to on a cost benefit or opportunity cost analysis of the Biden forgiveness program. A lot of people say, well, it doesn't do much, and it leaves the country in a whole lot of debt. And from a cost benefit analysis, was it worth it? I'm not sure whether I'm wanting to speak to that particular issue. I'm sure some people are going to be very grateful that they've gotten whatever they could get. Now, there are a whole lot of people for whom it will do nothing or very, very little. But the fact that we have a group of persons from red states who are essentially saying that you've exceeded your authority, Mr. President, and even trying to forgive in this small amount, I guess kind of speaks volumes as to the political climate that in which we live. I was particularly struck by Richard's view. I thought it was very creative. I mean, and it's true. I mean, you speak the truth. I think Wu made some very great common sense points. I mean, when we take out these 30-year mortgages, for example, I mean, we're basically paying for our house almost a couple of times. And so understanding how interest works and how the government is really benefiting from these loans is something that people don't really talk about, as well as educational institutions that continue to raise tuition. So there's a lot to be said about all of that. And one thing I don't want to do, even though I'm about to do it, is it would be great if people were able to pay as they went along and to pay their tuition without having to borrow. But that's not a good argument. I was blessed to have my tuition from private K to through law school paid by loving parents. And so I just appreciate that. But by the same token, I do understand that there are many people who just are not going to have that blessing. And so what do we do? Do I believe from in my heart that it was a great thing for Biden to reach out and do this? Yeah, I think it was good. But if you were to apply a cost benefit analysis to it, I'm not sure. It may not look as quite as good. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah,
Was
I
it
think
political? Probably.
What you said and what you desire is we could all pay for college as we go. I think that it's a real challenge is how we learn. As a therapist and a coach, I look how people learn, and if we really understood that, and there's so much innovation we could do. There are some tremendous professors. I mean, if I look at where I learned the most, it wasn't about the schools, the rooms, or anything. It was about one professor who just grabbed me and took my brains and ripped them apart. And then I thought, wow, I'm getting things really framed out differently. So how can we do that? And one way, there's so much education online, but how do we put it together in a way that gives kids the social structure they need, but also the best we have so that they can take it in? And I think that I've given this some thought. I won't go into it, but I think there's ways we can take higher level education and do what you want, Professor Rogers, and that's make it pay as you go and still deliver massive value to the students in terms of their educational process.
Yeah, I don't know where the money goes. As the son-in-law of a college professor, I don't. He's definitely wasn't getting rich off of his students. So I think part of the problem we have with everything is it's getting back to the inflation problem, right? So when you think about if you bought a house in the 80s, that's not long. That's okay. There we go. That's almost what, 40 years ago.
Yeah, bought the first house in 72 for 58,000, sold it for 1.1 million.
There you go. All right. So with that being said, that's a perfect example. There's some people in our society that were excluded from that process in that wealth building, right? And because of that, they are just now entering that market. Imagine they don't have, I live in New Jersey. It's not uncommon for a house to be $1 million, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to buy $1 million house, guess what you have to have? $200,000 saved up.
Mm-hmm.
Not 15, not 20, $200,000. Now, I would venture to say that if they polled the U.S. population, how many people have $200,000? I guarantee you it'd be the 1%, right? It'd be 1% of the economy that has that much money. So right now we have people excluded from the process just because their parents could not buy property that would have appreciated in the last 40 or 50 years. Right.
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem today of that real economic equity. When you look at really what the Pell Grants, the major recipients of Pell Grants are minorities. Right. So I think that was Biden's nod to minorities. He's made a few of them, vice president, Supreme Court justice, the list goes on of the people who supported him in the process, trying to make some sort of equity in our economy. And I think as we go forward, as a country, until we get some more equity, right, we find a way to get equity and keep the prices down, right? Because like what you said, when they were thinking about putting federal grants into these schools and scholarships, they were thinking that it was going to allow more people to go to school, right?
Mm-hmm.
But conversely, what you saw was the prices went up, right? Because they realized, I don't think there's a limit to what people paid. Right now, I have friends who are going to Ivy League schools are paying $80,000 a year, right? Who would have thought that even 10 years ago, right? So that's how much things are going up. So it's a demand and it's a supply thing again. We have to fiddle with it. One of the headmasters of my children's school said something very important when my oldest daughter was in kindergarten. He said, I don't know if your children are going to go to college. And every parent looked around and why are we spending all this money? But he said, I don't know if that's what they'll need at that point, right? Yep. Things are changing that fast. Yep. So maybe that's what's going to actually be the cause of education to go down. That now that people are able to get so much education, there's so much knowledge out there, there's so much skills that you can build up without going to school. Maybe that will finally bend the curve to something more reasonable.
Boy, I sure second that, and I think we're in for a big change. So that, like Professor Rogers pointed out in his dream, is that kids don't graduate with those burdens. And I think there's ways to do that. And I'm looking forward to that day.
So, gentlemen, before we conclude, OPEC, of course, recently announced a 2 million barrels a day cut in oil production, an amount that could drive oil and gas prices back up after weeks of a downward trend. Remember, it was going downward starting, I believe, around August, September. And as the oil price started to go down, Biden's approval rating went back up. The meeting of the 24 OPEC plus oil producing countries, including Russia, comes at a time when much of the world is already battling soaring energy costs. A supply cut will also exacerbate tensions, it's estimated, between Saudi Arabia and the United States, where President Biden has been trying to rein in prices at the gas pump ahead of the midterm elections. For those who may not understand the correlation, can someone explain how is it that OPEC's reduction in oil production causes gas prices here in the United States to spike up? And if you can also give your analysis on the political ramifications, potentially, as we're heading 14 days out. We're 14 days out from this crucial election.
Yeah, I think part of it, and I think the other members have pointed this out, is a lot of it's expectations. Biden came on in his, when he was campaigning for presidency, says we're going to end oil. So if you're an oil company or if you're invested in oil, you're going to say, ooh, maybe not. Prior to his administration, I understand we were actually filling our own oil needs. In other words, we were shipping some and we're getting some, but net, we were making our own enough oil to supply our needs. So and I'm not making a judgment here, but the environmental movement, the anti-oil, the anti-energy movement, I think has created a psychological state whereby just emotionally and in terms of making projections, we're more hesitant to really go all out. And I know there's just a lot of great solutions to carbon emissions on the future. And I think that we're cutting ourselves off far too soon prior to those solutions coming online. I saw an estimate that said, even if we go to zero carbon emissions tomorrow and stay there, the differences will be almost negligible in 50 years. Now, whether those are accurate or not, I, of course, can't say. But I think we need to take care of ourselves. We need to be self-sufficient in energy and build. I think there's a whole new set of nuclear technologies that can come online. And I think that with the other green energies, we can really make this country great because we run on energy. And a lot of naivety about energy, which drives fertilizers, which drives our food supply, our transportation system. We talked about Professor Rogers about and you talked about the complexity of our supply chain. Without energy, that all collapses. So let's figure out and put a priority on creating more energy for our country as a hedge against the whole supply chain collapse.
So, Michael, thank you very much. I appreciated that thoughtful commentary, Mr. Friesen. What OPEC is trying to do in cutting supply kind of goes back to a basic tenet of like economics 101. Over a period of time of reducing supply, it causes the supply to, of course, decrease, but it causes the price to increase. Now, the problem with oil is that oil is essentially an inelastic good because the prices don't typically change that much simply because people are going to purchase gas one way or another.
Yep.
It's an inelastic good, and inelastic goods, the prices remain the same, essentially the same, whether prices increase or decrease. What OPEC and its allies are doing, in my thinking, by cutting supply is more akin to market manipulation, acting as a cartel, attempting to achieve a result that would not otherwise be happening. They're really counting on a significant coordinated decrease in supply to result in a rise in prices in response to their attempts to manipulate the market. But if one of the conspirators fails to cut supplies, the whole scheme, I think, Michael, will collapse. Now, I can only think of one other time where it worked to effect, and that was during OPEC's oil embargo between 1973 and 1974. Which
I
caused
remember.
you remember that, which caused a lot of headaches for many people.
Yeah.
But oil generally is an inelastic good. People are going to buy oil regardless of whether the prices are sky high or low. But I think what they're hoping, Michael, is that if they can have this coordinated manipulation of the market, that it can cause the prices to perhaps go up. I know certainly the Biden administration is concerned about it, and I think we're all concerned about it. So from an economic standpoint of view, that's basically how it works. You reduce supply, prices tend to go up, right? Yeah, because you have the whole idea is you have more dollars chasing after fewer or lesser quantity of goods, and whenever you have too many dollars chasing too few goods, you're going to have an increase in aggregate demand, and the problem is that the supply is just simply not there. Something has to give, and people will bid it up. We've seen that with used car prices and the like. So I haven't been following that carefully to see whether prices have gone up, dramatically. I don't think oil prices in this country have gone up to the point where they were, but I know that there's a fear that they might, and this OPEC shenanigans isn't helping things.
Yeah, I have a friend who ran for president a while ago, a senator from Illinois. You might know him. And I remember when he was running, he said he had this insistence that we move to electric vehicles. And his opponent from the other party, at their convention, they were screaming, oil, oil. They wanted that. And there was a big resistance. I don't know if anyone remembers it because, 14 years ago was a long time in the American memory. But there was a feeling like there was never going to be this move to electric vehicles, right? And then there's this guy named Elon Musk who said, you know what? I'm going to push this thing. I see it going somewhere. And look at that. 14 years later, he's the richest man in the world, right? So, and the reason why I bring that up is there's a lot of money in other things than oil. And if I was in the oil business, I would be trying to get as much oil as I can, as much money as I can while I can get it, right? Are we going to switch from oil and gas overnight? Absolutely not. It's going to be a long time, but the decline is here. The decline is, it's here. And, in 2008, we had the big crash and we had the car companies coming to Washington, D.C. I remember they asked them, how did you get here? They all flew on their jets. And then they came back the next time in concept electric vehicles, right? To show like they were considering the environment. Well, how great would it have been if GM then said, you know what, we're going to produce electric vehicles for next year or 2 years from that. Instead, they're pushing them now, 14 years later. So I say all that to say a lot of what we're going to see is going to be manipulation of the market because their day is coming. It's almost like Kodak and the digital camera thing. They're going to get them. They were trying to get all the money they can when film was still in because they saw the writing on the wall too late, mind you, because they could have controlled the digital business themselves. They saw it too late. And I think if you're sitting with the most precious thing in the world underneath your country and the rest of the world's going to buy it, you're going to manipulate things to try to get at least the governments in place that would support your business around the world.
Well, Mr. Friesen, Mr. Northcliffe, Professor Rogers, this was an incredibly robust discussion, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you each for what you brought to the table. This was a very eye-opening discussion, and we look a balcony perspective on the issue that most voters are going into the voting booths saying that is their top priority, the economy and inflation. So thank you so much. I'm forever grateful to each of you. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and conclude episode 80 of the Political Mike podcast. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate the time you gave to everyone. It was wonderful.
Thank you.